Hello, everyone. Welcome to the North Carolina Museum of Art's virtual lunchtime lecture, A Date with Director Hillings. My name is Maria Lopez, and I'm the manager of film and lecture programs at the North Carolina Museum of Art. Thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with us today. Before we begin with the program, I'd like to give everyone an overview of the agenda for today. Our very special guest today will present, and then we will have a short Q&A session. Please enter any questions using the Q&A function or the chat box. We would also like to let you know that the recording of this event will be shared via email and made available on YouTube. Well, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Director Valerie Hillings, who is only the 9th director of the NC Museum of Art and also the first woman to hold this position. She's here today to share some insight into the past, present, and future of the NC Museum of Art. Welcome, Valerie.
Thank you, Maria. And I'm looking in the chat and seeing the names of so many great friends. So thank you for being here today virtually. I look forward to the time when I can see you in person, but today, of course, I always love my PowerPoints, and so I've got one to share with you today. But before I start, I'll just give an outline that I was reflecting on what I would want to talk about today. And I think really what's on my mind right now, I mean, so many things on my mind about our great museum, but also really about the collection. The collection is something that I'm thinking deeply about all the time. And so I know many of you are familiar with the museum, so a few of my first slides will be familiar, but I wanted to just sort of remind myself and remind us of how the collection formed, and then actually to let you in on some new acquisitions and some new ideas we have around the collection, because it's continuing to grow. We are pretty immediately putting a lot of things on view, and I think using the collection in new and interesting ways, some of which many of you will be familiar with and others are on their way. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully get us off to the races. So I've been, since I arrived at the museum, I think many of you know, or most of you know, that I've been really intrigued by the history of the North Carolina Museum of Art. And that included a chapter that's sort of, in a way, prehistory of the museum proper. And we've done a couple of exhibitions already where we've explored these themes, but I love looking at old archival pictures. And here's a really great one of some of the members of the North Carolina State Arts Society that was the sort of founding entity that drove the decision-making and effort and energy behind wanting to form an art collection and museum for our state, to form a collection for the people of North Carolina. And in particular, I am always interested in the role played by Catherine Clark Pendleton Arrington, who's in that fantastic 1920s outfit there. And then to the far left, John Blair, who's director of schoolhouse planning. So was very active in this group. And you're right, you know, really what we're looking at are the 1920s as a founding point, which is such an early point to have a real commitment to the idea that art could play a role for education, for enjoyment, and of course, just to be part of visual expression. The historic moment for this institution, and one we'll be celebrating 75 years since next year, was a 1947 decision by the North Carolina legislature to appropriate $1 million to build an art gallery. You see there, the Senate bill was called the $1 Million Art Bill. So we're, you know, in that time, that was in any time, but in that time in particular, that was a very significant financial commitment made to forming this collection that would allow the museum to found itself. Because of course, most museums historically have been keepers of collections. And fortunately for the North Carolina Museum of Art, we stand on such a foundation. The first physical location, which I became really, many of you heard me say this, when I arrived in North Carolina almost 3 years ago for this position, everyone was telling me about their memories of Morgan Street, the first physical location opened in 1956 for the museum. I love these old images where you really note that it was, you see here some of the most beloved pieces in our collection, and you see them very differently in a building like this. So you see, for instance, in the lower left, you see our Bacchus, who I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, our John Singleton Copley, you know, great works of European masterpieces, because of course, the very first appropriation monies we're used to acquire major works of European and American artworks. And I love just seeing these installations where you really get the feel of, they have a bit of a lower ceiling height. You feel, for instance, the Copley that's in our majestic high ceiling West building here, you feel a sense of its compression and majesty. So I've been really focused on thinking about exploring how our collection has been seen and thought about in different buildings, in different installations, because it really does change one's perspective. Early in our history, of course, the game changer, if you will, in the early history for the collection was the Samuel Press gift of 69 paintings and 2 sculptures. And I know these images are small. They're really not meant to show you individual works, but rather to show this incredible wealth of material that came into the museum's collection, taking us further back in time with the collection, bringing such superstar masterpieces as the Giotto picture in the middle that I'll also speak about a bit more later, but really feeling a sense of gratitude that there were these formative moments for the collection. And this is actually when we debuted the Crest collection, which I think we're familiar with the Botticelli Tondo on the left, but the ways in which art brought people in the community together at the museum are things that I've been really interested in exploring. Of course, there was a decision point at which the downtown location was getting a little bit too small, and a long debate that I won't encapsulate here today was where we should move. Should we stay downtown or should we move? And as you well know, we ultimately moved to Blue Ridge, where we are today. And I love this site picture in the upper left. Of course, the site when it was chosen was adjacent to a youth detention center, Polk. You see that in representation in the lower left, but also the original vision of the architect, Edward Durrell Stone, is in the upper right, which I always find fascinating to look back to what was imagined at different phases of a museum's life. Here, what's very clear is, as many people have said, the vision for the North Carolina Museum of Art was a museum in a park. And so it took a while to get there. And I think those images in the lower right are very interesting for those of us that do remember when only East Building was here and that the park was not developed. It was as you'll see in some future images of mine, there were cows grazing on the land. It still had the prison and detention center adjacent. So the kind of incredible utopian vision that is represented in the original rendering wasn't quite met. And so as all institutions, we've taken our time to figure out our identity and how we're going to proceed. And to that end, the collection in Morgan Street days was fairly narrow in its focus, but over time with great gifts and with great purchases, we've been able to grow our collection so significantly, enhancing what we had in the beginning and defining very distinctive collections, such as the Judaic art collection, for instance, our African collection, and then very particularly, of course, our modern and contemporary collection. So the museum evolved into a survey museum that had allowed visitors to go from the classical period to the contemporary. And that is where we find ourselves today with this really incredible breadth of cultural examples across culture, across time. And it's certainly thinking about the defining aspects of the collection is something that I and the curators are very much engaged in right now, engaged in a project of thinking about that. Thinking about the campus evolving in the late 1990s, we completed the Museum Park Theater seen here. But what I want to highlight today, I started out by talking about buildings, but of course, buildings are often the containers of art. And certainly that's the case in the case of the Park Theater, where you see not only the art of musicians on the stage, and we look forward to the time when we can do that again soon, but I want to focus you on the images on the bottom, because not everybody knows that the design for that theater and a wall that is adjacent to it, I'm going to see if my little pointer, I don't know if you can see it, but it's sort of alongside the P in the lower left. This is an artwork, a major public artwork by the artist Barbara Kruger, who's one of the most important 20th and 21st century artists. And she was a part of creating this space, but also creating one of her classic word pieces. And I was recently, I was walking in the park and I found myself looking at her wall, if you will, where she's really talking about please be all you can be. And I think as a contemporary art student, I was always intrigued by the way Barbara got us to zoom in on the most pertinent concepts and change the world. I loved in the middle of the pandemic, the way people were coming to the park, and I was one of them, to see those words change the world. It really got inside my head and inspired me. And then, of course, Picture This has so many layers of meaning, but imagining that words can be art, that structure can be art, but really what this is was a first important move for the museum to speak to its interest in supporting original art production that is site specific and is unique to the institution. And so this for me is a really point of emanation, if you will, for what became one of the next and very right up against it most important projects, and probably the most defining artwork in our collection, which is Thomas Sayre's Geyer. And Thomas shared with me some of his process images this summer, and I wanted to share them with you again today because you think about when you study art in school or you go and visit it, you don't always understand all the elements that go into it and all the participants that make things possible. And so here you have this amazing image of Thomas beginning to study the site. He worked with local students, and I think this is a great opportunity for museums to involve students in the whole process. And he began by framing up what might be the form, and you see that it was very different. It started out as this kind of diamond shape and then gradually moved to the rounded shape. And I loved thinking so much about earth art, which is such an important movement that begins sort of really in the 1960s. You see that Thomas was excavating the earth in the image in the bottom left, and then gradually creating the forms that became those three rings, standing them up, working with people with their cranes. And then, let's see, my slide is going to advance. 1 second. It's pausing here, so give me 1 second. There we go, perfect. And then when it gets realized, this amazing public day where people could come and celebrate the inauguration of the artwork. And you see Thomas speaking in the bottom left, all the people gathering, a dance performance in front of it. This work that didn't exist becomes an iconic piece of the institution, and it begins a process along with the beginning of the Greenway to activate the park that wasn't yet the park. And so I think between the Barbara Kruger piece, which is frankly, as you know, practically adjacent to Thomas Sayre's Geyer, you have these two really significant public artworks that begin to stake a claim for the museum as a commissioning entity, as a collector, as a supporter of artistic production, and of taking artistic production and weaving it into the fabric of life as we experience it. Moving a little bit forward from that moment, when I was a student, most of you know, I was a student at Duke University. I used to come to the museum. I came to the old building, and actually those last images of the theater and the Geyer were not here. Those were not here when I was a student, but upon returning to North Carolina, seeing what the campus had become was just phenomenal. So very, very astutely, my predecessor realized that we had outgrown East Building to be able to show this amazing collection, and we were able, I guess now it's 11 years ago, almost to the day, I think it may have been April 11th, that the West Building was completed. That's in the upper left, this amazing Thomas Pfeiffer building filled with light that became the home to the North Carolina Museum Collection. In the bottom, I cite the Auguste Rodin because the gift of this major body of work by Rodin, by the Cantors to the museum really created a profound area of strength. We're the second, south of Philadelphia, we have the largest collection of Rodin in the United States. And the building built, not for it, but with it in mind, certainly began to become the signature of our institution. In the same time, the park began to be developed, and I'm showing you in the upper left, you catch kind of a glimpse of one of the rings in the middle image, and then on the right, one of our great park artworks, the Ginka Shonobare artwork. Little by little, we began to evolve an art program that was not just commissions, Actually the big sculpture in the middle image is a loan of a Marc de Souvero, and the right is a Shonobari work we bought. So art in the park, art as a second gallery to our secondary, but also important gallery to our interior spaces evolved. And I love the aerial view here because what was that sort of emptiness that I showed you early on is this sort of fulsome campus with these major buildings, with the park, with all the experiences that unfold. And this is certainly in my directorship, I look forward to continuing to develop all the parts of the campus and connecting them, and really thinking about connecting them through art. As an art museum, I feel that art can lead us through the space, create those experiences that are unique. And what I've been thinking about what's already here, because as you think about where you're going to go, you want to see where you are. And this slide really moved me when I put it together, because these are all artworks that have either been commissioned or purchased for the institution, for the park, in the last, pretty much mostly in the last 10 to 15 years, some of them more recently. But I began to see this incredible connection point, because so many of them are referencing nature, materiality, and really blending in. So on the one hand, Ursula von Rijdingsvaart's monumental piece that was commissioned alongside the West Building, with this more almost lightweight, ethereal Roxy Payne, Daniel Johnston and Haas Haley, who are really important North Carolina artists, giving us different forms that relate to the division of space. The Martha Jackson Jarvis using bricks from the old prison. The Chris Drury Cloud Chamber, which was commissioned for an exhibition actually, but creates this almost shadow box Oculus experience. And I will say we are currently conserving the work. It's closed for the moment, but you will soon be able to enjoy Cloud Chamber again. And we'll look forward to sharing more about that project. But when I arrived, I kept hearing of its magic. And then I'm certain that many of you have had the fun of that young boy in the bottom right, of sitting on Hank Willis Thomas's conversation bubbles sculpture that kind of double up as park furniture and bench, and an invitation to imagine and tell your own story. So I feel like there's many moments of magic in this collection that you can encounter in the park. But we also have been doing temporary works in the park. And when I arrived for my interview, I encountered the two heads by Jaume Plenza that I know so many of you still miss. They were alone. They were not here as a permanent acquisition. So, but works like that begin to help you see space in a new way. I'm particularly fond of the Heather Hart House in the upper left, which was here in the summer of 2019. And I could look from my window of my office and see people doing sun salutation on the roof and playing their music. And the Leonardo Drew that was here through the pandemic, where people could sit in this magical carpet and cityscape in the park. These opportunities for us to create art experiences are something we want to continue to do. Part of that temporary piece, for instance, the example in the bottom left, we have billboards in the park. If you haven't seen them, I encourage you to go see them, where we're commissioning new work on an ongoing basis. Often we have North Carolina artists featured, we feature young artists. And so this kind of rotating experience gives us the opportunity to change how you see the space. Great examples being the Louise Jones, which was commissioned for the side of our building for our Georgia O'Keeffe show, and the Oh My projections that were part of You Are Here. So really, one of the things I've been thinking so much about is how do you enliven what are all the spaces we can enliven with both collection and temporary exhibitions? And then equally, how can we make sure that what you're seeing outside, you have a way of learning more inside, and what you learn inside will encourage you to go outside. So really seeing the park as its own gallery. And here comes my first sneak peek. This is not in our park yet, but this amazing work by Jeppe Hein is going to be installed this year in the park. It's our latest acquisition. And it is, as you see it here, it's a series of mirrored pillars that you can navigate and see yourself reflected in and see nature reflected in. And I think many of you know that we often are, one of our taglines here at the NCMA is art plus nature plus people. And if ever there was a piece that did that, it is this Jeppe Hein. I think it will be spectacular. And I certainly will be giving more information when we know about installation. One of the interesting lessons of COVID was that we actually have had to do some workarounds and some changes because we need members of the artist studio from Germany to travel here for the installation, and right now they can't. So we will give you this majestic work to experience as soon as we can. Wanted to also share some information about other new acquisitions. We have been, over the last few years, we've been trying to grow every collection. So we have, of course, had a little bit of a heavy weight towards contemporary. That's sometimes more within reach in terms of purchases, but made major other acquisitions as well. So I'm just sharing with a few with you. So speaking of older art, this in the bottom left, the amazing portrait of a woman by Gerrit van Honthorst, from the 17th century. Our new European curator is an expert in his work. This is a stunning portrait. And what I liked when I put this slide together, what I was thinking to say to you is over time, I've really come to understand how strong our collection is in portraiture. And that's something we've been exploring and will continue to explore, but also beyond portraiture, the representation of the figures. So you can have something ranging from the Igbo artist full masquerade costume from the 20th century. In our African collection, we're really pushing forward our emphasis and interest in exploring masquerade, both in terms of its physical manifestation and its performative manifestation. And we'll be doing a lot of work on that coming in the future, but this is a very significant work. Very excited about it. The upper left is a very poor representation of an amazing video installation by the South African artist William Kentridge, which interrogates the history of European nations using their colonized, the countries in Africa that they colonized, using citizens from there to help them during World War I. It's one of those great things about Kentridge is it's immersive. It has these illustrations and moving image, but it has music. And I think that will be a really exciting work that I think will probably be debuting in about another year. In the middle is one of my proudest moments, acquiring this sculpture by Simone Lee. Some of you may have heard Simone will represent the United States at the next Venice Biennale in 2022. And she came out of being a ceramics expert, but really went from a somewhat smaller scale to this more human and then even monumental scale in a work she did on the New York High Line. But this was a piece that was part of a series that was shown in what was a big year for her, where she was represented at the Whitney Biennial and she won the Hugo Boss Prize at the Guggenheim Museum. So this piece was in the Whitney Biennial, and it is the portrait of a woman. Her portraits, very often they lack representation of the eyes. It both prevents the kind of gaze that is associated with looking at women that's been written so much about, but also owning her power and her interior self. I love the abstracted base. I'll say more about that in a minute when I get to another work. The photograph on the right is by a Thai woman artist, Araya Rasmarsuk, who we did an exhibition of during last year, but unfortunately it was only open for a week because of COVID. But this is a remarkable project where she took reproductions of Western artworks into the Thai countryside and recorded people's responses to what they saw. You may remember we had a Scott Avett, the musician Scott Avett painting show. This Pietà painting of his was acquired out of that exhibition. And then India Beale's most recently, her series of portraits of women representing themselves as how they would want to be seen as they apply for jobs in the world. Incredibly acquired 2 photographs by her. She's a graduate of UNC, and we're very excited that we have a representation here of national, international, and North Carolina artists, which is the mandate that I've put for the collection going forward. Speaking of exhibitions as an inspiration, we did also have, you saw the outdoor piece by Leonardo Drew. We were attempting a first experiment to show works inside and outside the museum. And so we created a really wonderful mid-career survey that you see represented in both of these images, actually, that was meant to give you the opportunity to see his practice inside and then go outside and enjoy the piece. Every time I passed by this work on the right, which is, as the caption reads, it's called number 235, but we kept calling it the tree. It's this incredibly massive piece that was really a conglomeration of pieces that Leo had in the studio. And he gradually built up this tree. And I kept thinking, because he's so interested in film, he mentioned to me many times the Wizard of Oz. And I kept feeling, on this side, I felt Wizard of Oz. And on the other side, it is very striated. It makes you feel like you're inside the movie The Matrix with all the lines running up and down. But you do feel your own physical self in relation to it. So it becomes more like an installation. You're seeing here our chief curator, Linda Doherty, with Leo. He finally made it to see the show, the last day of the show. And with great excitement, I announced that we have acquired this work for the collection. I think it will be a remarkable addition to the contemporary collection. But one of the things that was on my mind as we were contemplating it is we've got a lot of trees in the collection. I mean, not that Ursula's isn't necessarily a tree per se, but all of this idea of certain themes and forms that repeat themselves in our collection got me excited. And actually, Leo revealed that he's very good friends with Ursula von Reidingsvard. And so in fact, seeing his tree with her work, it really does remind one of conversations and lines of influence among artists, and the importance of that, the importance of thinking of how people are thinking about the same theme in different directions, or working in a particular medium, but in different directions and scales. And so what I began to, as I was looking at this, I was just thinking so much about how artworks can lead us in and through space and experience. Another recent acquisition that just went on the wall is a work that's on the left. It's paired here with our Ellsworth Kelly, but it's a work by Von Spann. And I didn't keep the age in any of my other slides, but I'm so struck. This artist was born in 1992. He's very young. It's exciting for the museum to support young and emerging artists. And this piece, I encourage you to come because you can't really get the sense of it through the image. It's so dense in its texture. It's also interesting, he decided to name it Carolina Blues, in part because he spent summers in North Carolina. When he was first heard about the acquisition, the gift, it was not a commission, but then he found himself turning it. And I think you can see there's definitely some Carolina blue in there. But this piece is fundamentally abstract. It is indeed abstractions, an area of great strength for us in the contemporary collection. But it's also, as you can see by the subtitle or the series title, Marked Man. It is also figurative, the X form of what happens when somebody is stopped and asked to spread their hands and legs. Also reference to Malcolm X. Many different layers of experience is being referenced by the artist here, but also creating it in this very interesting abstracted form. And in fact, a lot of the abstract pieces in that gallery are looking at social experiences and issues in this very aesthetic way. The collection, sometimes I've been trying to think a lot about the historic collection. So here is the Giotto that I promised you would come back. And we of course, what we've learned from our Scott Avett exhibition, from other exhibitions, many conversations, is we know a lot of artists who came to the museum over the years and found inspiration in works in the collection. And one such example is Christopher Holt, who actually did a little piece for us talking about the Giotto. And I'm just showing this to set the stage for what for me is one of the most interesting stories of my career here thus far. I was having the opportunity a few years ago to travel around North Carolina and get to meet colleagues and see art. And I ended up hearing of Ben Long, fresco painter Ben Long, who many of you may know, and ended up in a very small church in Western North Carolina looking at his Last Supper. And these are my very poor iPhone snaps, so sorry about that. But I found myself standing in this small space looking at this profound representation. And there were 4 people standing in front of the altar. And they were looking at me. And one of them, I'm just going to go back for 1 second, was Christopher Holt. And he turned to me and he said, I'm so happy to meet you. Who are you? And we recognized that he said, I'm an artist. I'm getting ready. I was a student of Ben Long and others, and I'm getting ready to create a major fresco in a church in Asheville. And I said, I'm coming to Asheville in a few weeks. So sure enough, my team and I, this is our picture with Christopher, went to see him and his work in progress, where we got to see the cartoons for the fresco. And it is in the Hayward Street congregation, which ministers largely to, has a large homeless population that they minister to and provide meals for. And it kept getting inside my head that we have all this art, such as the Giotto and all the things in the crest and other that are religious, but they're also speaking to a condition of nourishing community and thinking about others. And I thought, why couldn't we just have a show of Christopher's work? So sure enough, we quickly decided it, we put it together, and we were able to show his studies. And I was just really amazed at his draftsmanship, at the way he captured the faces of members of that community and different stories. The young boy in the bottom images really stood out to me, Damon. And after talking together as a group, we loved the show so much. And Christopher, you may also have heard Christopher's been chosen to create a fresco in Dix Park in their new chapel. We decided it was really important to acquire something from the show for the collection. And so here I show you the two works we've just acquired. One is a portrait of Jeanette, who really is one of the key figures ministering to people in the church. Brian, who is actually the minister in the church. And it just, you know, I was thinking, for those of you that are familiar with art history, how much the intensity of these pictures reminded me of Albrecht Dürer's pictures, of his drawings. And so we're really very pleased to have added these to the collection. So in this case, both the Leonardo Drew and in the Christopher Holt, we were able to bring works into the collection that will forever solidify our connection to these wonderful and important artists. Thinking about the collection, I arrived and I was so struck by the strength of the collection, but also by the fact that as I experienced it, there were, you know, it was fairly chronological and geographic, and I was really excited to think about how I could look at the collection. How do you look at a collection with fresh eyes? And I'm showing you here some images that I took at our last Art in Bloom, which we're really excited we are going to be able to do it, it looks like, this year. But I was new and I thought, what do you mean, this flower thing? And I was so struck, and these are really great examples of the way in which the floral artists were able to create a dialogue with our collection, give it a fresh look. I watched visitors feeling much more comfortable talking to their friends and their family members about what they were seeing in the actual artwork than I would normally observe. And this continued to reinforce something that I thought about and the curators had been thinking about, of how could we do this on a regular basis? And this gave birth to what we have called interchanges. I think many of you on this call may know what they are, but I pulled up this little blurb that we had put on social media. But what we began to do is we began to move single artworks out of their usual location and to relocate them into another gallery to create conversations between artists, time periods, and styles, really. And I give you 4 examples here that I always particularly love. I like to give the story that in the upper left, what I was really struck by is going into the Dutch galleries. We were very strong in 17th century. There were, you know, the landscapes have a particular tone, if you will, and a particular color. And then we put this Hans Hofmann in the middle of there from the 20th century. And suddenly you realize this idea that a time has its own palette and it has its own way of representing. But at the same time, both of those works, green is a really prominent color. And I don't think I would have paid as much attention to the green in the Hofmann had I not seen it in that context. Equally, I love the images on the right, which has been one of the fan favorites of Interchanges, where you have King Louis and this great picture on the right by Kehinde Wiley. They're both basically young men who are figuring out who they are, and they're asserting their power and their identity. And I loved it because Wiley is looking, in this case, he's actually looking at Sir Joshua Reynolds as a model, a British portraitist. So in that gallery where everybody is, you know, looking at these grand traditions of portraiture, I love that we're reminded that portraiture is timeless. It happens throughout time. And again, it's a great strength of the NCMA collection. Similarly, on the bottom, you have a dialogue between a Dutch still life of the 17th century and a contemporary piece that even has a citation from that picture and other artworks in our collection. But the idea of what I like here, what you're seeing is you see portraiture, landscape, still life. The connection point is very simple. It's easy to enter into. You don't need a lot of information. And I think it has shown to invite looking, which I really, really love. And then in the bottom, the Nick Cave sculpture on the left, which, if you know Nick's practice, sometimes these sound suits are worn for performances, paired with one of our masquerade pieces out of the African collection. I love also the idea, and we're going to get even stronger thinking about it, that is the importance of performance and performing arts. which has been a strength of the museum, and we want to continue to do that. And to that end, that was a great lead-in. Some of you may have been able to visit us in December when Caroline Colquitt, the pianist who's represented in the middle, was playing music in our African galleries in front of the Elenot Sui. We've worked with Carolyn. We've commissioned from her a new piece that will be a musical interchange. So not just art interchanges, but I'm showing you here on the left an art interchange with our other Yinka Shonobare work, paired with a Dutch sea scene, so that you have this idea in these two works talking about the history of colonialism, both in terms of, granted, this subject of Shonobare is Eleanor Hewitt, who's American, but the idea that, for instance, the fabric that she wears was a Dutch production, but is so associated with the African continent, this exchange and taking of cultures, the seascape with the Dutch, that they were a great maritime power, but also a major slave trader. Looking at these dialogues of across time and place and how they touch each other. And with Carolyn, she will come in and she is in about, I think it's 1 to 2 weeks, is creating this new music piece entitled The Netherlands, the Shonobare, the Journey. So, and she's going to be partnering with the musician on the right. And Bonnie Thron, who's the principal cellist of the symphony. So we're really excited that our collection will not just be about looking, it will be about listening and about exploring. And yet again, as an art museum, to be able to enable, support, and promote original production is something that I think is extremely important for us. It's also another way for us to look at this different opportunity for not just being a museum with art, but a museum of the arts. Okay, 1 second, my slide is hooking up again. Hopefully we'll get there in a second. But yes, and I should also add here that we are doing other residencies with artists. It won't just be tied to the collection. Upcoming, we have a dance residency where the dancer will be coming in and working with dance as a form of addressing trauma. So I think that will be, there'll be many other opportunities for that. There we go, great. So in terms of the collection, we obviously we've been doing the interchanges, but we've also been looking at ways to explore thematics and topics. And one of the things that really interests me as a classically trained art historian is the ways in which contemporary artists are mining, combining, and critiquing sources, earlier sources. So bottom left, I'm pointing out a Van Dyck portrait that's been paired with an Amy Sherald portrait, one of my favorites. And what's so interesting about these two works is they're actually, in essence, tying to literary sources. So the Van Dyck is a young woman who's actually very young, been widowed and looking for her second husband and representing herself as Venus, the goddess of love, with a Cupid. And the Amy Sherald portrait, she has this giant teacup, which you have to think of Alice in Wonderland when you see the giant teacup, but there are these, and one is a representation of a woman by a man, one is a representation of a woman by a woman. It's a really fascinating dialogue looking at the ways in which portraiture sometimes has been tied to those tropes. Similarly, the work on the right, lower right, by Micheline Thomas, Three Graces. Micheline, one of my favorite artists of all time here, is looking at a lot of art historical sources, but obviously the classic story of the Three Graces is colliding with the language of Cubism, of fashion magazines in the 1970s. And as I always like to say, that middle figure certainly looks a lot like Oprah Winfrey. So a lot of layers of art history and references, and also obviously looking at the beauty of Black women, that you can't probably see it in the slide, but the amazing use of buttons and sequins and all of that is really strong. And it is next to the Simone Lee that I was talking to you about. So you have the Simone Lee portrait of a woman and her solidity next to the Micheline Thomas. And then kind of shooting across from them, you see in the middle this amazing gold figure, this gold sculpture by Michael Richards, which is one of my favorite works, not in the collection yet. I hope we can eventually get it, but on loan to the collection, which combines 3 layers of history. One is looking at the history of the martyr saint, Saint Sebastian, who was always represented with arrows piercing his body. In this case, they're airplanes. The second layer of reference is he's referring to the history of the Tuskegee Airman, trying to represent and recognize their important contributions. And thirdly, it's a self-portrait, which takes on a much deeper meaning because very tragically, Michael was killed in the World Trade Center attacks. He was literally in the building that was attacked by an airplane and died. So it takes on this incredible poignancy. But what it also does is, like the three graces references or the Cupid, he's referring to these earlier and indeed religious subject matter. Similarly, the Kehinde Wiley right behind to his right is based on the story of Judith and Holofernes, of Judith defending and protecting her community, which this figure is also representing the strength of her community and protecting community. Tying back to that photograph I had shown you, where actually the painting that was taken into the Thai countryside is the female artist Artemisia Gentileschi's representation of Judith and Holofernes. And then this picture that then, without the baggage of knowing about Gentileschi or European painting, the Thai villagers responded in ways such as, well, it seems like she's angry at the man. Oh, there's a lot of blood. So, what way we look at art and look at our world changes through so many filters. And then finally, one of my favorites, the wonderful painting by Beverly McKeever in the upper right, juxtaposed with a 17th century Madonna. Beverly and I were talking, we were so struck by the blue scarf that her sister wears with the mantle of the Virgin, and then that contemplative, grateful, just kind of reflective posture of the figures. So really what we're aiming to do is, in our themes, in our cross-temporal themes, in our within time themes, is to look at the ways in which many dialogues are happening. The lens can be backwards and forwards. I always say art is always, every art is one time contemporary, and everything contemporary becomes art history. So this really, for me, encapsulates that quite well. Another way we've been looking at the collection differently is inviting people to come in and do projects. So we've been partnering with Liberation Station Bookstore to do readings of children's books that better reflect children of color. This is Victoria and her son Langston, and you see that Langston is filming in that gallery where we're doing the musical interchange. The different ways in which a collection can be seen afresh and tied to other parts of creation. The collection is also being used as a tool for creating new exhibitions. So we just opened a show to be young, coming of age in the contemporary. I show you an installation view in the upper left. Again, sorry, my own photograph. So you have to come and see those remarkable works in person. But this is a show that one of our newer curators curated and really went into the collection looking as far back as the upper two images are works from the 40s, obviously contemporary photography, but looking at all these, if you will, passages that we all go through in life of being born, growing up with our family, of communion, first communion, our friendships, the things that really tie us all together. And it was really remarkable and fun to see some of the images that she found in the collection, including the Scott Avett picture that I showed you is in this exhibition. But it is, we have had an ongoing practice of showing contemporary works in that gallery as a thematic show, but this actually takes us across 20th and 21st century and different mediums. And here I would just remark that we do have a very strong photography collection. We haven't been able to show as much as we would like all the time because you may know it's very light sensitive, but we've been able through interchanges and exhibitions like this one to share that part of the collection. And then another area that we've been exploring, and I'm excited about vis-a-vis the collection, is continuing research with conservators who are helping us to understand the artworks that we own. This is our Bacchus, an amazing study that discovered what was a work in pieces and by detective work of old photographs and drawings, which you see in the upper left or upper right, sorry, began to realize that what we had in parts was really, it was a composite sculpture, but it was all ancient pieces. And so we put him back together again, if you will. And we also decided that it fully reversible. We decided to give him his arm back. And you see in the bottom right, the NC State basketball player that very kindly agreed to be the model for the arm. And then the exhibition in the upper left. So one of the things about the collection is it's not just the histories of the artist, the history of the object, but it's also the history of the physical nature of the object and where it came from and how it should live on into the future. One of the things that came out of the pandemic, was born of the pandemic. It was literally almost a year ago, in talking with my colleagues and thinking about what were we going to do while we were closed. I began to think about asking the public which of our artworks in the collection were most meaningful, because indeed the North Carolina Museum of Art's collection is the people's collection. And so we gathered interest, gathered responses of which works were interesting. And then we began to imagine these artworks as a springboard for entire experiences, multi-layer experiences. So a painting might suggest a musical performance or a film or a storybook reading. And so we launched what we called NCMA Recommends. And I've got those kind of rather remarkable statistics for you there on the slide, but it really helped us to realize the value. I mean, you've seen some of it in my slides, but of giving the collection the chance to speak in different directions, to hear from many voices, creative voices, not just text, but also image and moving image and sound. And so it really, as we were reflecting on how we want our collection to be seen, this mechanism of NCMA Recommends, which we're still doing, and I hope you're all getting it, it grew our thinking about the collection to prepare us for what's going to be a really big year for the North Carolina Museum of Art. So I kind of set the stage at the beginning of my conversation with you about 2022 being a big year for us. Reminding you in the upper left that in April of 1947, what will be next year, 75 years ago, $1 million was appropriated to found our collection. 25 years ago, we began our program in the amphitheater, which you see in the bottom left. And we are going to celebrate those things next year. Next year is the year of the People's Collection, where we will be seeing these new things. You will be continuing to see old friends. But most importantly, and I'm showing you the image in the upper part, is another collection, thematic collection show we have right now on the theme of light. You can see the wide range from the light of the Hanukkah lamp to a Monet painting and beyond, African art, is we are rethinking and reimagining how our entire collection is installed. And indeed, in the fall of 2022, when you return to the museum, or if you come to us digitally, you'll begin to see how we're reimagining and rehanging the collection to reflect not just chronology and geography, but thematics, cross-cultural narratives, multiple arts. The various aspects that I've been describing today will be present. We will be commissioning new works in different mediums and continuing to allow art to tell us about what it is to live in this world, to communicate our experience, to open it up to multiple narratives and perspectives, which is something that I came to this museum very committed to and remain committed to inviting and embracing all the different communities that partake in the museum, live in the state, live in the nation, live in the world. I see we have some international visitors to this program. We're very excited to continue sharing the collection with the public, continue interrogating it, celebrating it. And so I really hope that, I've given you a small snapshot of our outdoor galleries, our indoor galleries, our virtual galleries. All of that is such an important part of what we do, and look forward to really getting deeper into it and celebrating it in the year ahead. At this point, that's the end of my talk, and I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, yeah, we have quite a few comments. Right now, I'll start off with some of the questions we received. Diane Beckman asked, can you tell us more about the construction that is ongoing in the parking lot and plans for the art park?
Definitely. I was going to include, Diane, the image of the rendering, but I took it out at the last minute. But yes, we are currently constructing near our smokestack, which is the only remaining physical remnant of that Polk Youth Detention Center. We are building a welcome center. So we are actually working through history by changing it into welcome. It will be a small building that will have bathrooms and a gathering point and some amenities. And it will be the new entry point from that part of the parking lot into the museum park. For the art park, we are beginning, I was a little bit setting the table for you with these different types of commissions that we will continue to explore and do in acquisitions. So art will continue to be both permanent and temporary in the park, and we're currently trying to evolve exactly what that will look like. And part of that has been studying what we've done in the past, because for instance, in the middle, I'm looking out the window here, the Martha Jackson Jarvis piece that was the column, the rings, the Daniel Johnston, they're all fundamentally, they're made out of earthwork and they're basically abstract. So I think of that as one zone. So thinking about the different zones of art experience that we can have. And also, we've obviously used the ellipse in the past as a site for art. I'm looking around the museum campus to figure out where we can have another, for lack of a better term, a temporary exhibition space outside.
Oh, and I also just want to add, sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button, but Diane also made the suggestion of making this kind of conversation a yearly event.
Happy to do it. Next year will be a big one.
So we do have another question from Chuck Till, who is asking, well, he says, from about 1995 and on, NCMA had a series of blockbuster exhibitions, such as Monet in Normandy. Are these likely to continue, or has there been a shift in focus?
We are going to continue to have blockbuster exhibitions. I think we're all in the museum world trying to figure out exactly what blockbuster means in this context, but I will, taking your example and what I know of this museum's history, that often involves Dutch 17th century and French modernism, and I can tell you there's one of each queued in the future coming this way. So we will continue to have exhibitions on the range of geographic and chronological topics that we represent in the collection. That's why we have Gold Mummies of Egypt right now. And then we will continue to do experimental shows like you are here in the future. So I'm looking with the team to create a balance of bigger and smaller shows, defined blockbusters, and also more specific works.
Okay, we also just got a question from Liz Moore. She says she loves the museum and the variety of the collection and wants to know if there's any plans for new acquisitions of Andrew Wyeth's works.
Well, what I'm happy to say sitting here today is in less than a month, we will have our new curator of American art starting her position. And I will be sure to tell her that that's something people are interested in. So she will be helping us to define acquisitions in American art going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to, this is going to be the last comment that I'm going to share. And it's about the concept of the interchanges. And it's from Anton Mellison, who's joining us from Berlin, Germany. And he says, the concept of interchanges is very interesting. This really deepens our understanding of individual pieces and connections which seem unlikely at a first glance. And he also loves the Dutch reference.
I bet he does. Hi, Anton. So good that you're here with us. I'm so happy. He's a great colleague of mine, curator that I worked with many years, and very happy that he's able to join us today. Yeah, Interchanges has turned out, it was so simple in its beginnings, and then they kept growing and growing in how many we had, and the more interactions I had with people, it was really clear it was resonating and that it was opening itself up to new ways of seeing, and actually even just new ways of seeing of individual works and whole galleries. So I actually charged the curators with keeping them as part of the concept for the new installation. So we'll see how that shapes out, but I think that we'll be seeing them again.
Okay, well, if nobody else, let's see. Oh, somebody wants to know a little bit more information on King Saul and the statue.
All right. I wish I have him in another PowerPoint, but so let me just describe for those of you that don't know, we were able to acquire, oh gosh, I guess it was just about over 2 years ago, a major sculpture by William Wetmore Story of King Saul, dating to the 1860s, that he created in Rome. And it has amazing visual parallels to Moses by Michelangelo, but a monumental sculpture of King Saul as he's beginning to go into madness. It was the most significant sculpture that we've acquired for the American collection, probably other than the Rodins, for the collection. And it allowed us, it's in the portrait gallery where you saw the King Hindawili and the King Louis, and he is going to stay there forever. He was a work that's similar to the Bacchus. We did a long conservation project. He had to be cleaned. he was a school mascot. He ultimately ended up in the United Kingdom in a private school, and the kids would decorate him. There was glitter. There were, you know, kind of all these different things. We had to clean off some dents from a stick from a game, but he has been restored to his natural beauty. But he is so heavy. He's I want to say over 400 pounds, the sculpture, and then there again, the base. So we had to reinforce the floor underneath him. So I have been told that even though we are reinstalling the new collection galleries, Saul must stay where he is, but he is a truly majestic example of, monumental sculpture from that time. And also we're continuing to do research on him because I think, he was transported from Rome to the United Kingdom for a World's Exposition, purchased by a lord. His house became the school that I'm talking about. So, and then the last piece to share is that much as Bacchus obtained a new yet reversible arm, Saul had his toe replaced because a student apparently, we don't know if this is true, but they claimed they by accident dropped a sledgehammer on him one night and the toe forever disappeared. So very exciting, and also linked to other works in the 19th century collection that really did show the great work that American artists did as they spent some time in Italy.
We also have a question from Connie Schertz. Will the museum be closed during the reinstallation?
We will, the West building will be closed for a period of the reinstallation. We'll be preparing that schedule soon and sharing it with the public, but collection will be on view in East building during that time. And it will be, you will be able to see it. In fact, we're working on a really exciting inspired exhibition of the collection that you'll be able to see in the summer of 22, which I think will be very rewarding, and will tie back to some of the work we've been doing on looking at our history.
And we also just got a question from Diane again. What is the artwork behind you in your office?
It's a Matt Mulliken, and it is a piece that was given in honor of my predecessor by a great friend who was involved with Duke, but I love it. It's very, I'm sure you can't see it on the screen, but it's this amazing figure. It's actually a female figure rendered in this, what looks like fabric, but is all painted. And it's made in the 1970s. And actually, in fact, for some reason, all the artwork in my office right now are made in the 1970s, but I certainly, I always love that dialogue between, or the borderline between abstraction and figuration. And I've just loved this piece so much. I haven't yet been able to send it back out for the public to see, but you might see it, you never know.
And I'm just going to share a couple more comments in the chat. Vandy Bradow is saying, my grandchildren grieved the Patrick Doherty's work departure. Any more like that coming? The children adored it.
So most of you will probably know Patrick's piece that's inside the West building, the swirly wood piece in what up until the pandemic was the restaurant space. He had another outdoor piece, which is what she's referring to, that was quite magical. I didn't get to see it. I've seen the images, and it makes me think of fairy tales and the like. I certainly think that type of work is something that we would be bringing back. We're going to be thinking a lot about our family audiences coming up, and then also the idea of whimsical encounters. So I wouldn't rule it out.
And Ellen Blair just once made a comment that she's very appreciative of your energy and vision, and thanks you. And this is, I guess, a question more for me. Allison wants to know if we can bring back some lectures that focus on the historical collection, which we can definitely do that. I'm starting the process now, and the lunch and learn sessions, which I'm also exploring as well. So be on the lookout for that. But I think this concludes, and we ended right on time. This concludes this virtual lunchtime lecture with Director Hillings. Thank you so much for joining us today, Valerie. Thank you for your insight. I'm sure many of the people who have tuned in today are as excited as you and I are for everything that's coming up at the NCMA. And I'm also sure many of them are planning to visit the museum soon, safely visit the museum soon and see these pieces of the collection that you've mentioned. I think it'll be fantastic to experience them in person. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed the lecture, everyone, and look forward to having you at our upcoming events, and hope we can see you at the museum soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and for your interest and support in the museum. And we look forward to sharing the People's Collection with you every year, but especially in the year ahead. So thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.